want to start today with a story about a time I gave this talk a couple of years ago in a big financial services conference at a hotel in which people had lots of options to go to see different breakout sessions. So a woman came to see my presentation, and at the end, she came up to me and said, "I'm so happy I chose to see your talk, and I have to be honest, I almost decided to skip it because I really figured that I would hate you." And I said, "Well, thank you for that unusual compliment, and may I ask why?" And she said, "Well, I just figured that anybody who talked for an hour about happiness would just be really irritating and would be all about like kittens and rainbows and sunshine, and that by the end of the hour, I would want to strangle you. And I don't, so thank you so much." And I start this talk with that story to illustrate a really important point that I'll return to throughout today. There are people in the world, and I assume in this room, who are the kittens and rainbow kind of people, who are always happy, can always find that silver lining. I'm not one of those people. I'm somebody who actually has to work for my happiness. And I'm going to be talking about today about the predictors of happiness and lots of scientific research. But my final portion of today's talk will describe specific strategies that we can all use to increase our happiness, no matter where we fall on that natural happiness continuum. I have no conflicts of interest for today's talk. I want to start by talking about why we care about happiness. And basically, we all should care about happiness because fundamentally, happy people are different from people who are not happy in really important ways. Happy people are more helpful and less hostile. They go through the world in a kinder, gentler sort of way. Researchers a few years ago did a very simple study at a mall. They stopped random strangers and asked for very low-level favors. Could I have change for $1? Could I borrow your phone? Would you mail this letter for me? So very low-level favors. But what they varied was where you got asked the favor. Half of the people got asked for the favor in front of a good-smelling store like Cinnabon or Mrs. Fields Cookies. And half of the people got asked in front of a neutral-smelling store like Banana Republic or The Gap. Guess who got help faster? Cinnabon. So now you've already learned some information you can use if you ever need help at a mall. Happy people, importantly, are also less hostile. This point was brought home to me a few years ago. I was driving to the local McDonald's. My kids were in the back seat. I stopped at a red light. The light turned green, and I proceeded to make a legal U-turn to head into the drive-thru line, when all of a sudden, a car in the opposite lane ran their red light and careened towards me at a very high rate of speed. So I swerved and braked to one side, and they swerved to the other side, and we didn't collide. But it was very narrowly a really serious collision. So I caught my breath, proceeded to drive into the drive-thru line, and guess who's now in front of me in the line? That car. They place their order, they go to the window to get their food, and they then proceed to have like a 20-minute conversation with the cashier, like it's their long-lost cousin or something. And I'm getting more and more frustrated. You nearly killed me? Now it's a 20-minute drive-through experience? Finally, they pull away, and as they pull away, they stick their hand out the window, and they do a little wave like this towards my car. So I rolled down my window, and I made a different gesture. I drive up to the window, I hand my credit card in, and the cashier says, "Oh, that car just paid for your food." So then I felt like that. Because, you know, they'd driven away, and my kids had seen the gesture, and clearly they thought it was all good, right? We nearly killed you, but your Egg McMuffin is free, so we're good, right? And I'm going to talk later today about even very small moments of kindness can actually reduce feelings of hostility, increase happiness. Perhaps the reason I'm here today, happy people are more productive at work. Researchers have demonstrated that happy people are more productive across all sorts of industries. But one particular industry that has really taken this lesson to heart are all the Silicon Valley companies. This is a picture of Google headquarters. The Silicon Valley companies have gone out of their way to make the workplace fun. There's free snacks, there's circular slides, there's ping pong tables, pool tables. One Silicon Valley company profiled on the front page of the New York Times is doing something new to keep their employees happy. They're sending a cleaning service to every employee's house once a week. Would that make you happy? And I'm here to announce that, no, I'm just kidding. But this is, of course, something that they're doing not just to make people happy, but it's going to keep them very loyal. Could you ever quit a job that came with a cleaning service? You would work very hard to maintain that job. You would tell your friends, and you wouldn't have to leave work at 5 o'clock because somebody would be at your house vacuuming right at that moment. So lots of research suggests that happy people are more productive. As you all probably know well in your line of work, happy people also experience better health. And this is true no matter how you measure it. In a study my college students find particularly disgusting, researchers measured people's level of happiness, then, with the people's permission, they inserted a cold virus up their nostril. And they followed them for 4 weeks. And every day, they collected symptom reports. Are you coughing, sneezing, runny nose, etc. Every night, they collected saliva samples to measure antibodies to the cold in their body. And every night, they gathered the people's used tissues and weighed them to measure mucus production. Across every dimension, happy people were less likely to manifest signs of the cold. Another study, they measured people's happiness the night before a routine scheduled surgery. And then they looked at how quickly the people got out of bed. What were the nurses' reports? How much pain medication did they require? How quickly did they get discharged from the hospital? Across every single dimension, happy people recovered faster. But most importantly, what we all should care about, happy people actually live longer. This next study used a very unique sample, professional baseball players. And what they did was examine the facial expressions on these men's rookie baseball cards. Then they looked at how old the men were when they died. And here's the data. Men who had a flat expression lived to about 73. Men who had a slight smile, a mild smile, lived to about 75. Men who had a big, beaming smile on their rookie baseball cards lived on average to be 80. So this is a remarkable demonstration of the power of smiling as a measure of happiness in terms of predicting longevity. So it makes sense that we would all want to be happy. People who are happy are kinder, less hostile, more productive, healthier, live longer. But here's one of the challenges. Many of us spend a lot of time and energy looking for happiness in the wrong places. So I now want to turn to look at what some of the myths are about things that we expect will make us happy, but the scientific data really doesn't bear that out. So guess what? The number one thing is that people think will make them happy, but they're wrong. Guess what the number one thing is? Money. Good, that's always risky because sometimes somebody calls out marriage and it's, really awkward. Anyway, so good, yes, money is the right answer. Overwhelmingly, people think money. If I just had some more money, then I would be happier. Here's a picture of Tiger Woods' house, or maybe now Tiger Woods' ex-wife's house. And people think if I lived in a house like that, wouldn't I be happy every single minute of every single day? But no. The reality is we adapt very quickly to newfound wealth. And here's a simple example that I think we all can relate to. Who remembers the excitement about getting your very first cell phone? Who remembers that excitement? And that first cell phone could do what? Call people, maybe, right? Maybe. Maybe you recognized your first cell phone in that set of pictures. So that first cell phone was very exciting. All of a sudden, you could call people from the car. But if you had that cell phone right now, you'd feel very sad because we expect that our phones will also let us shoot a movie, read a book, buy a dress, etc., not just call people. And that's an example of the power of adaptation. Now, let me say one really important thing. For people who are living below the poverty line, for people who are worried, are my kids going to have food tomorrow? Do we have a safe place to sleep tonight? Are we going to have heat this winter? For people who are worried about survival, more money absolutely does increase happiness. But for people who are not worried about subsistence, more money does not lead to more happiness. And some people have known this for a long time. As Benjamin Franklin said, money has never made man happy, nor will it. There is nothing in its nature to produce happiness. The more of it one has, the more one wants. So what else do we think will make us happy but really doesn't? Climate. Overwhelmingly, people think if I just lived in a warmer, prettier climate, surely I would be happier. If you do large-scale surveys of Americans and you ask them, would you be happier if you lived in California or North Dakota? Guess what pretty much everybody says? California. And this is actually the basis of a joke that I tell students in my health psychology class. So here's the joke. A patient goes to a doctor, and the doctor says, I have terrible news. You have 6 months to live. The patient says, well, that is terrible news. What do you suggest I do? And the doctor says, you should immediately move to North Dakota. And the patient says, absolutely, I'll do that right away. And if I move to North Dakota, will I live longer? And the doctor says, no, but it will feel like forever. People from North Dakota super don't like that joke. But here's the reality. This is wrong. Gallup poll 5 years ago, North Dakota is one of the top happiest states. We have no idea why, but people in North Dakota are, in fact, very happy. What else? Life events. Overwhelmingly, people think, when this life event happens, then I'll be happy. When I graduate from college, when I retire, when I buy a house, when I get a promotion, whatever, then I'll be happy. So take the example of getting a promotion. You want a promotion, so you work harder and harder and harder to get that promotion that you're certain is going to bring you permanent happiness. You, in fact, get that promotion. What does it turn out you now have to do? Yeah, that job, actually. And that job has pressure and deadlines and colleagues, and the permanent happiness you thought would be yours, it's not there. But there is one kind of life event that's a little bit interesting, because this life event is consistently associated with happiness for some people, and that's the life event of marriage. So what the research on happiness in marriage shows is that marriage does consistently bring some people happiness, and those people are called men. Men. Overwhelmingly, married men are happier than single men, they're wealthier than single men, they're less likely to be hospitalized for psychiatric disorders. Overwhelmingly, married men benefit in all sorts of ways. And what's even better for the men is it doesn't matter who they're married to. Anybody is good. Now, here's the challenge for women. Happily married women are, in fact, happier and healthier than single women. But unhappily married women, they are less happy and less healthy than single women. So good marriage is good for women, but bad marriage is really bad for women. For men, all marriage is good. And so the important takeaway of that point is that men need to find somebody. But women need to be picky, because women need to find the right somebody. And what I like about that finding is that by all accounts, this suggests that this setup is going to be better for William than for Kate. William's going to be happy. Kate, we hope so. But it's probably too early to tell, and William's mom, married to a prince, not so happy. One more example of something that we overwhelmingly think is going to make us happy, the life event of parenthood. People think having children is going to be really important, blah, 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 it's really going to bring me happiness. This is a little bit of an outdated picture of my 3 kids. Yeah, and in the picture, they look really quiet, clean, well-behaved. And that's really the challenge, is that in the abstract, having children seems like a very good idea. But the reality, day in and day out of parenthood, is what? Stress. It's hard. I gave this talk in a big ballroom in Orlando one year, and like 800 people, and I said, the reality, day in and day out of parenting, and a woman in the front row goes, hell. And it echoed over the ballroom like, hell, hell, hell. Now, in fairness, she had a 2-year-old at home. But here's the reality. Day in and day out parenthood is playing lots of boring games with absolutely no strategy. It's doing huge amounts of laundry. It's literally touching somebody else's poop. And as Annie Lamott says, having a baby is like suddenly getting the world's worst roommate. So here's what the data on the science of happiness and parenthood tells us. Parents do, in fact, experience more joy than non-parents. There's the joy of the homemade Mother's Day card, or your kid learning to read or ride a bike, or hit a home run in Little League, and these sort of wonderful, special, tender moments. And those peaks are bigger peaks than non-parents experience. But those highs are absolutely colored by the lows. The stress, the heartache, the worry. And those lows are lower than non-parents experience. So the data on science of happiness and parenthood says parents have more highs and parents have more lows, and non-parents have a much more even keel existence. Now, sometimes I give one of these talks and a person comes up afterwards and says, but Catherine, you have to remember, if you have children, you might get grandchildren. Grandchildren makes me very happy. And that's what I cling to. So, I've talked about why we care about happiness. I've talked about what doesn't make us happy. I now want to turn to the good news. And the good news is there are lots of things that do make us happy. So one of these are behaviors. They're very small, simple behaviors we can engage in daily life that make us happy. One of these is eating. This won't be the most surprising thing I say, but it's not just the act of like chewing and swallowing. It's eating particular kinds of foods. What kinds of foods make us happy? Dessert, chocolate, sugar, fats. There's no evidence for happiness in like celery, for example. Now, fortunately, there's lots of data also suggesting that exercise makes us happy. Who here has already heard about the link between exercise, endorphins, happiness? Who's heard about that? Great, wonderful. So most of you already know this data. When we exercise, endorphins are raised in our body, a chemical that actually increases our happy mood. So this is absolutely true. Plus, one of the best feelings we can have, it's the feeling of having exercised, right? And unfortunately, the only way to get the having exercise feeling, you have to exercise first. It's too bad. We know that shopping makes us happy. Again, this is not totally surprising, but it's more interesting than you might think. Who here has ever had a wonderful feeling of happiness because you found the perfect gift for someone you care about? Raise your hand. That feeling of happiness is greater than the feeling of when you're buying for yourself. So it's not about shopping, acquiring things. It's actually about shopping, relationship building, and I'm going to talk about that at the end today. We know that nature makes us happy. Overwhelmingly, people who are looking at nature, spending time in nature, experience higher levels of happiness. And what's particularly remarkable is that spending time in nature is also good for your health. In one remarkable study done at a hospital in Pennsylvania, researchers measured rates of recovery following standard surgery, scheduled surgery, for patients who'd been assigned to one of two wings in the hospital. The way this hospital was set up, one wing overlooked a parking lot. So people who were in this wing saw cars and traffic and asphalt. The other wing of the hospital overlooked a lovely park. So patients who were assigned to this wing saw trees and flowers and grass. So researchers in this study compared rates of recovery for patients who'd had the exact same surgery but had been assigned to one of these two wings. And what they found is that patients who'd been assigned to the wing overlooking the park got out of bed faster, had better reports from nurses, needed lower levels of pain medication, and got discharged faster from the hospital. So across every single dimension, even looking at nature through a window sped up physical recovery from surgery. In a very recent study to try to understand what's going on that looking at nature through a window leads to such powerful physiological benefits, researchers brought in people, put them in an MRI machine to measure brain activation, and then showed them different pairs of pictures. I'm going to show you now two actual pictures that were used in this study. The researchers used like pairs of 32, and I'm going to show you two as an example. So one of the pictures was of a very pretty urban city skyline. You can see there's a range of colors, there's clouds, there's sky. It's not showing, graffiti or traffic or smog or something. Then they also showed them pictures of a rural nature scene. Also very visually appealing. Range of colors, sky, water, clouds, etc. So these are both visually appealing pictures, and yet, when people are looking at these pictures in an MRI machine, they show dramatically different patterns of brain activation. People who are looking at the urban city skyline show lots of brain activation. Their brain is firing, their brain is processing. People who are looking at the rural nature scene show relaxed, calm brain waves, like they're meditating or sleeping. So there's something about looking at nature that seems to be physiologically relaxing to the body, and that probably helps explain why it speeds up recovery from surgery. I started today's talk by describing the role of personality and how some people tend to be happier than others. And that's a very consistent finding in the literature. It's one of the reasons why short-term things like better cell phone, promotion, graduating from college, retiring, etc., don't have the long-term benefits that we might expect on happiness, because so much of our happiness is, in fact, rooted in who we are. As Martha Washington said, "I am still determined to be cheerful and happy in whatever situation I may be, for I have also learned from experience that the greater part of our happiness or misery depends upon our dispositions and not upon our circumstances." So what is it about personality that leads to happiness? And there are three distinct variables that are consistently found in the literature. One of these is extroversion. People who are extroverted like meeting new people, they're outgoing, they like doing new things. They probably have an easier time finding and forming social networks. Two, people have high self-esteem. They feel good about themselves. Here's a cartoon that shows the opposite. "Dear diary, sorry to bother you again." And high self-esteem seems to lead to higher levels of happiness, in part because people with this ability can find a silver lining no matter what. I'm going to tell you now about a little bit of a complicated study, so pay attention, or otherwise some people will laugh and you'll be like, "What happened?" So in this study, they brought in college student dating couples, so people who were dating each other, and they said, "We're going to give you the exact same questionnaire. And then we're going to compare your answers to see if people in a dating relationship see the relationship in the same way." So you'll fill out the exact same questionnaire. They measured people's self-esteem, and then they sat them across from each other at a small table. The first person turned to the first page of their questionnaire, and it said, "Where'd you meet? How long have you been dating?" This person turned to the first page of their questionnaire, and it said, "Where'd you meet? How long have you been dating?" That's not the complicated part. Then this person turns to the second page of their questionnaire, and it says, "Please list everything you hate about your dating partner." So you start writing, kind of messy, kind of stubborn, kind of stingy, whatever. This person turns to the second page of their questionnaire, and it says, "Please list absolutely every single item in your dorm room." So you start writing. "I got my books, I got my futon, I got my computer, I got my shoes, I got my posters, I got my phone," whatever. And you're writing and writing and writing. And this person is watching you. And they're going like, "Why are they using the back? Why are all those things coming so easily to them?" Then everyone turns to the third page of their questionnaire, and the third page says, "How do you feel about your dating partner?" So here's what's remarkable. People who are high in self-esteem, who have sat there and watched what they believe is their partner getting a hand cramp as they write 500 things they hate about them, they say, "I love my partner so much. I mean, after all, they hate 500 things about me, and we're still dating. So this is a wonderful turn of events. This is like my soulmate. This person is never going to leave me. Their love is really deep. This is a wonderful turn of events." And that's the power of high self-esteem. You take what should be a relationship damning experience and you find a silver lining. One more personality trait that operates in much the same way, optimism. People who are optimistic, again, very good at finding this silver lining. Freud told a story about a couple who came to see him in therapy. And at one point during the course of the therapy session, the husband turned to the wife and said, "If one of us were to die, I think I would go and live in Paris." Because, if it was one of us, it'd be you. I have this, Paris plan. I have a son, my oldest child, who was in public school from kindergarten through 8th grade. In 9th grade, he moved to a prep school that he was woefully underprepared for. He struggled mightily in every possible way, but especially in Spanish. And he struggled enough in Spanish that midway through his first trimester, he had a 50 in Spanish. This is a school that uses the traditional 1 to 100 grading scale, so 50 was really not good. So at the end of November, Andrew calls me and says, "Mom, I got my grades. Good news about Spanish." And I said, "Oh, thank goodness," because I was so worried, you know what, with the 50. And he goes, "Yes, good news." I said, "Great, what'd you get?" And he goes, "I got a 58. And I said, "That is not good news." And he goes, "No, it is. It's 8 points higher than I had." And I said, "Andrew, a 58 is an F. You got an F." And he said, "Mom, it's really an F plus." And I said, "I'm a professor. Like, that's not an option. Like, there is no plus after the F. You know, that's not a choice." And he goes, "Yeah, but, you know, at the rate I'm going, I'm going to have a 66 in January." And I said, "You know, that's a D. Like, that's also bad." But here is really the good news about Andrew. And, you know, Andrew's life is that by all accounts, someday he's going to end up in prison, and hopefully not a Spanish-speaking prison. But he's going to be fine, because he's going to call home and be like, "Mom, I got this bunk bed. I have a roommate. There's this exercise yard. They bring the meals into the door 3 times a day. It's so relaxing." Because anybody who can call home with the good news about the F plus, he's going to be fine. I mean, he's going to be poor and living in my basement, but he's going to be happy. And this ability to find the silver lining, no matter what, is tremendously predictive of happiness. I'm going to share with you now one of my favorite quotes, and it speaks to this precisely, and it's by Nelson Mandela. "I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed toward the sun, one's feet moving forward. There were many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I would not and could not give myself up to despair. That way lays defeat and death." And that's the reality, that overwhelmingly this ability to find the silver lining is tremendously predictive of our ability to find happiness no matter what. And here's what's good news for all of us. We actually get better at finding this silver lining with more life experience. I'm going to show you now data on the link between age and happiness. And this is data conducted by a large Gallup poll, hundreds of thousands of Americans. And what they did was survey adults ages 18 to 85 about their happiness. And what they found was very consistent and, in fact, has been replicated across cultures. So I'm going to show you the data, and then we'll talk about what it means. So first of all, on your far left, you can see that people who are 18 are very happy. And really, what the hell is there not to be happy about when you're 18? Then, in what is bad news for some people here, apologies, happiness drops like a stone, right up until around age 50. And this, of course, corresponds with what we think about in our society as a midlife crisis. It's also an age at which many people have teenagers living in their homes, perhaps coincidentally. And then, however, in what is good news for everybody here, happiness increases in your 60s, in your 70s, and in your 80s. Again, they've looked at people up to age 85. So this is a really remarkable finding, that happiness, in fact, increases as you age. So to examine what explains this, researchers have done qualitative interviews with people across the lifespan. And what they found is very consistent. People in their younger years are very focused on having big social networks, what I like to call Facebook friends. So big, big networks of people. People in their 60s and 70s and 80s get rid of the riffraff. They focus on high-quality relationships. So they have fewer relationships, but they're relationships that are meaningful with people who they care about and who care about them. And that's actually precisely illustrated in this Peanuts cartoon. As we grow up, we realize it is less important to have lots of friends and more important to have real ones. Now, here's the practical question. Do you have to live to be 80 to be that smart? So to examine that question, researchers at Stanford University conducted another series of interviews. They looked at men who were in their 40s and 50s living in San Francisco in the early 1990s who were HIV positive. So these were men who were facing a dramatically shortened life expectancy. They were in their 40s and 50s, but they had at that time what was a disease that was going to kill them in the next 5 years or so. We didn't have any sort of treatments at that time for HIV. So they asked these men, how do you spend your time? And what they found was that these men reported doing exactly what people spontaneously do in their 70s and 80s. They got rid of the riffraff. They focused on high-quality relationships. So the importance of that finding is that what it means is that when we believe that time is running out, because we're in our 70s or 80s, or because we're in our 40s and 50s but are facing a dramatically shortened life expectancy, we automatically prioritize quality relationships over quantity. But the power of that is that means we could all make that choice at any age, regardless of our health circumstances. And the single best predictor of our happiness across the lifespan is the quality of our relationships. People who have high quality relationships experience higher levels of happiness. Now, I've talked about relationships already today. Marriage, if you're a man, children, for no one. But the good news is relationships do make us happy. They just don't have to have particular labels. They can be with friends. They can be with family members. They can be with dating partners who we don't marry. Doesn't matter the label on the relationship. What matters is the quality of the relationship. But here's what we all have to worry about. It's getting harder and harder to have meaningful, substantive conversations with people in our lives because of the constant presence of cell phones. Who has ever been somewhere, airport, restaurant, park, etc., seen two people together having a conversation that looked a lot like that? Each person on the cell phone. Who's ever seen that? Happens all the time, right? Here's a really simple illustration of the hazards of the presence of cell phones. Researchers in this study brought in people who are willing to have a get-to-know-you conversation with a stranger. They paired up people with a stranger in a private room, had a 15, 20-minute conversation, and the researchers audio taped that conversation and then coded it to test for how meaningful, how vulnerable, how intimate. Was it a good quality conversation? So half the people just got paired up and had this conversation. The other people also got paired up, had a private conversation. But in this condition, before the conversation started, the researcher took her cell phone, she turned it off, and she put it on the table right between the two people. So the cell phone is turned off. It's not going to ring. It's not going to vibrate. It also doesn't belong to the two people having the conversation. It's the researcher's phone. And yet what they found was the presence of that phone turned off on the table led to a lower quality of conversation. Less intimate, less meaningful, less vulnerable. So imagine the hit that we all take in our daily lives because of the presence of cell phones that, of course, typically aren't turned off and do belong to us. So I've talked about why we care about happiness. I've talked about errors we make in the pursuit of happiness, and I've talked about things that actually do make us happy. I now want to turn to some overall conclusions about the field of positive psychology and what we know about the best predictors of happiness. I've talked throughout the talk today about the power of individual differences, and in fact, genetic research realizes that about half of our happiness is in fact coded in our genes. And this explains why some people find happiness easier than other people. And it's one of the reasons why things like better climate, promotion, better cell phone, raise at work, etc., don't bring us lasting happiness. As this cartoon says, I could cry when I think of the years I wasted accumulating money, only to learn that my cheerful disposition is genetic. And that's the reality, that happiness, in fact, comes easier for some people than others. But here's what's important. This also means that 50% of our happiness is up to us. It's not coded for in our genes, and that's the happiness that I care about, because that's the happiness that we all control. I've talked today a lot about the power of adaptation. And I've said, yeah, all these good things happen, and you just adapt. So you get a promotion, you move to a warmer climate, you buy a house, whatever, you win the lottery, you just adapt and you adapt and you adapt. So all of these good things that should bring us lasting happiness don't. They have a fleeting impact. But here's what's really important about the power of adaptation. This power of adaptation also means that we adapt to terribly bad events. I'm going to tell you now about a really sad story, and some of you, depending on where you live in the country, may remember parts of this story in this episode. And it's about a family living in a small town in Connecticut, the family of Dr. William Pettit. So this was a family, husband, wife, 2 daughters, living in a small town in Connecticut when one night, 2 men who'd recently been released from jail broke into their home. They tied up the dad in the basement. They tied the mom and the 2 daughters to their beds, and they proceeded to sexually assault the mom and both girls. The girls were ages 11 and 17 at the time. Then, to hide evidence of their crimes, the men set the house on fire. The dad was able to escape from the basement. He had a head injury, but he lived. But the mom and both girls died of smoke inhalation. So most people hear about this story and think, how could he ever find happiness again? He's lost his wife, he's lost both of his kids, and he hasn't just lost them. He's lost them in about the most horrific set of circumstances that we can wrap our minds around. And for most of us, that level of loss just seems too much to imagine that we could bear. And yet here's a picture of William Pettit from a couple of summers ago. He met a woman who volunteered as a photographer for the foundation he established to honor his family's memory. They became friends. Over time, they fell in love. And his first wife's family attended their wedding and said, "We're so happy that you have found love again." And 2 Decembers ago, they had a little boy. So that does not mean that he's the same happy. And it doesn't mean that the tragedy doesn't change and shape and influence his life in fundamental ways and always will. But what this story speaks to is the power of the human spirit. That we all have the ability to find happiness again, no matter our circumstances. And the most important lesson from the field of positive psychology is that happiness is largely about the power of effort. We have to decide that we want to be happy. We have to decide that we deserve to be happy. And we have to be willing to structure our lives in ways that bring us that happiness. As Elizabeth Gilbert says, happiness is the consequence of personal effort. You fight for it, strive for it, insist upon it, and sometimes even travel around the world looking for it. You have to participate relentlessly in the manifestations of your own blessings. And once you've achieved a state of happiness, you must never become lax about maintaining it. You must make a mighty effort to keep swimming upward into that happiness forever, to stay afloat on top of it. And that's really the most important lesson, that we all deserve to be happy, but happiness does not come easily for all of us. And that for those who don't magically go through life finding the silver lining, you have to make a decision that you deserve to find happiness and that you're willing to structure your life and spend time and energy and effort in the ways that will bring you happiness. So as promised at the start of my talk today, I always end the talk in the same way, which is giving people specific strategies they can use to increase happiness in their own lives. And none of these are things like sell all your belongings and move to Aruba. They're all things you could do. And I give 10 because my hope is that everybody here will find 2 or 3 that speak to them, that resonate with them in some way. So 1, change your behavior. There are lots of things we can do that are very low level in our daily lives that are empirically associated with happiness. So 1, who here gets enough sleep? Raise your hands. So a lot of you could start with that one. Who here makes a point of exercising regularly? Great, great. And, just for the record, sleeping is actually easier than exercising. FYI. Who here makes a point of spending time outside? Great, great. Many of you are doing that. Of course, you can exercise outside. That's 2 birds, 1 stone. Does anybody here meditate? Great, great. I see a lot of hands. Lots of research now in neuroscience is suggesting the power of meditation for improving happiness, but also improving physical health. So if you don't meditate now, this is a really simple, easy, cheap one to start that has lots of benefits. 2, find your match, personally and professionally. So figure out what you're good at. Do something that you love. That could be in your career, it could be in your community, it could be mentoring, it could be writing. It doesn't matter what it is, but doing things that you find meaningful. I give this talk with some regularity to corporate audiences in which it's like, venture capitalists or something, and I always sort of struggle when I get to this point, like, do you do something meaningful? So let me just have a show of hands here. Who here finds their work meaningful? Yeah, and that's a wonderful thing, because a lot of people cannot say that. And as Steve Jobs said, the only way to do great work is to love what you do, and that's essential. But even if you already got it in your professional lives, you also need it in your personal lives. There is lots of research suggesting that people differ in the kinds of things that they find personally rewarding. There's a scale in psychology, it's called the sensation-seeking scale, and what this scale measures is the extent to which you feel happiest and most alive when you have high levels of physiological arousal or low levels of physiological arousal. This is not a scale like IQ where high is good, it's just different. There's some people who love the feeling of heart beating fast, muscles tense, rapid breathing, and some people who really hate that feeling. Doesn't matter which one you are, but what matters is figuring out which one you are so you can do the right things. So I'm going to give you a quick quiz. I'm going to give you 2 choices, and I want you to raise your hand for whichever one best describes you. Some people would like to parachute out of an airplane. Some people would like to never parachute out of an airplane. Raise your hand if you're a parachute jumper. All right, put your hands down. And raise your hand if you're one of the smart people. All right, so that's 1. 2, some people when they go into a pool go toe, knee, ankle, thigh. Some people when they go into a pool dive cannonball right in. Who are the toe, knee, ankle, thigh people? And who are the dive cannonball people? Okay. 3, some people when they go on vacation like the excitement and adventure of camping outdoors. Some people when they go on vacation like the warmth and comfort of a luxury hotel. Who are the campers? Raise your hands. And who are the luxury hotel people? Yeah, I say to my husband, your camping wife is your second wife. So again, it doesn't matter which one you are. What matters is that you figure out which one you are because different situations make people happy. 3, read a book you love. Who here remembers reading a book that they hoped wouldn't end? It's a wonderful feeling of happiness, and it doesn't matter what the book is. This is my husband's favorite book. It's a little dark, but he reads it, he finishes, he starts it again at the beginning. I say we're going to save so much money in our marriage, you just need the 1 book. But he loves the writing, he loves the father-son story, so it doesn't matter what book it is. Throw yourself into reading. It's a wonderful way of increasing happiness. 4, keep a gratitude journal. Who here goes to sleep at night thinking about their to-do list and the problems they're facing? Raise your hand. Yeah, so this is like a different idea. And so this idea is to, before you go to sleep at night, write down 2 or 3 things you're grateful for in your life right now. And that's the key. They have to be right now. They can't be like, things I'll be grateful for once I retire, once I win the lottery, once I buy a house, whatever. As Dale Carnegie said, one of the most tragic things I know about human nature is that all of us tend to put off living. We are all dreaming of some magical rose garden over the horizon instead of enjoying the roses that are blooming outside our windows today. 5, make a gratitude visit. This idea came from Marty Seligman, a professor at Penn, and what he has people do is think about a person who changed and shaped the nature and direction of their lives in fundamental ways. Could be a first boss, a teacher, a mentor in some way, but somebody who really played a fundamental role in shaping who you became. Raise your hand if you have someone who played that role in your own life. Raise your hand. Oh, that's great. That's over half of you. That's wonderful. So here's the challenge. Guess when we often express what those people meant to us? When they die. At a eulogy. So this idea is not to wait for the eulogy. It's to write that person a letter, telling them how they changed and shaped and influenced your life, and then travel to that person, stand in front of them, and read the letter aloud. And that is a tremendously powerful experience for the person who's reading the letter, and of course for the person who's hearing the letter. So when I think about the person who played that role in my own life, it's my 7th and 8th grade English teacher, Mr. Doherty. Mr. Doherty had been a Marine in World War II, and he had lost his right arm picking up a grenade. So he had this stump on his right arm, and he had this giant metal hook that strapped around his body with like a little claw on it, and he would write on the chalkboard with this claw. I went to public school. He also smoked throughout the entire day with this hook. So the whole thing was like very scary. He was like big and red and this Marine, and he had this stump and this claw and this smoke. And I was terrified of him. But for 2 years, every paper that Mr. Doherty did for me, he covered in red. Unpack, organize, expand, detail. And Mr. Doherty taught me how to write. So I was an undergraduate at Stanford University. I was a doctoral student at Princeton University. I'm here talking to you today because I know how to write. But I didn't learn how to write at Princeton and Stanford. I learned how to write from Mr. Doherty in 7th and 8th grade. That's why I'm here talking to you today. And when I learned that Mr. Doherty had died, I wrote his widow a letter and told her that. And that was too late. So if you have somebody who played this role in your own life, don't wait, because this one quickly becomes the eulogy. 6, smile, even when you aren't happy. This is the like fake it till you make it idea. We often think about smiling as reflecting how we feel, but what's remarkable is that smiling can also change how we feel. Sometimes your joy is the source of your smile, but sometimes your smile can be the source of your joy. What's particularly remarkable is that simply the act of smiling also changes how our body physiologically responds to pain. In one very clever study, researchers brought in people and had them hold chopsticks between their teeth in one of 3 facial expressions. Neutral expression, mild smile, big booming smile. Then, while you held this facial expression, you put your hand in a bucket of freezing cold ice water. And they said, keep it there as long as you can, and when you can't stand it anymore, pull your hand out. And what they found was that people who held their facial expression in the big beaming smile kept their hand in the water significantly longer. And they didn't show the physiological response, blood pressure, in response to pain like the other people. So this study suggests that the mere act of smiling can actually change how our body physiologically responds to pain. Who remembers the baseball player study I started today's talk with? This is an explanation for why the men who went through life with this happy facial expression may in fact have lived longer. 7, perform random acts of kindness. And this is one of my favorites because basically anything counts. People who volunteer in their community, higher levels of happiness. People who donate to charity, higher levels of happiness. I'm going to show you next a map of the world. And every single country that's colored green, there's a positive correlation between happiness and charitable giving. So what you can see, it's most of the world. This is a universal phenomenon. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, does this mean that happy people give, or giving makes people happy, or wealthy people are happy and give? So in 20 of these countries, they did a second study. They brought in people, they did a short psychology study, and then half of them were told by the researcher, thank you so much for coming in. Here's a gift bag you get to keep to thank you for your participation. The other half of people were told, thank you for coming in. Here's a gift bag we're donating to a local hospital to thank you for your participation. Then they measured happiness. Guess who's happier? People who get to keep their bags or their bag goes to the hospital? Bag goes to the hospital. So giving actually makes people happier. Research using MRI data has examined how people's brain responds when they think about giving a gift. I talked before about the power we feel, how good it feels to give a gift to a friend. Research using MRI data shows that just thinking about giving a gift to a friend activates a portion of the brain that processes rewarding experiences. It's the exact same part of the brain that is activated when you eat chocolate. Also when you use cocaine, but that's like a less good example. 8, spend money on the right things. I talked before, money and happiness, no, there's no link. But the reality is we can spend money in better or worse ways. So what makes us happy? Spending money on experiences, tickets to the big game, tickets to a Broadway show, a concert you've wanted to see, travel. Spending money on experiences lets you anticipate the experience the thing, and then reflect back on it. So spending money on experiences is a great way of increasing happiness. Where do you not really get the biggest bang for your buck? Spending money on belongings, expensive watch, purse, car, shoes, whatever. Initially it's exciting, and then it's just your watch. As no one says on their deathbed, I should have bought more crap. And as philosopher Roger Corliss says, trying to be happy by accumulating possessions is like trying to satisfy hunger by taping sandwiches all over your body. Just doesn't make you happy. 9, avoid comparisons. Many times, we actually feel very happy, right up until we start comparing ourselves to other people. As this cartoon says, I do count my blessings, but then I end up counting those of others who have more and better blessings, and that pisses me off. As Teddy Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy. And this challenge about comparisons is really hard in today's day and age, in which many people are on something that I like to call fake book, in which people write about only the what? Only the good. My kid is valedictorian. I just ran the Boston Marathon in under 3 hours, again. Our whole family went to Tahiti for 2 weeks and loved each other the whole time. And that's the challenge of social media, is that you compare yourself to these people who have these perfect lives and feel worse in comparison. So when I'm on Facebook, I try to write things like, all of my kids have lice. Which I'm telling you more often than not has been my experience. But here's the wonderful thing about comparisons. We actually have tremendous control over the kind of comparisons we make. We can make comparisons that make ourselves feel worse, or we can make comparisons that make ourselves feel better. So when my son, the Spanish scholar, was on the verge of failing out of high school, what I continually told myself was, he doesn't have leukemia. And here's the reality. There are parents all over the world who have teenagers having chemotherapy in a hospital. And those parents wish their kid was failing Spanish in high school. So I'm lucky. And that's the kind of comparison that we all have the ability to make. That's within our own control. The kinds of ways in which we compare. That's up to us. 10. And I do this one last because it's the most important, and that's build and maintain close relationships. This is the single best predictor of our happiness. But here's the challenge. You don't get these relationships by accident. Close relationships require time and energy and effort and conflict and compromise. They don't happen by magic. They don't happen easily. I use this picture as a metaphor. If you look at a dancer on point from a distance, it looks easy, it looks effortless, it looks magical, it looks beautiful. But the reality of dancing on point, your toes hurt, they're bruised, they're calloused, you may be missing toenails, your legs hurt. It's hard, it's painful, it takes lots of effort and practice. And it's only to look at it from a distance that looks easy and magical and effortless. And my final quote for you today speaks to this, and it's by Tolstoy. But on entering upon family life, he saw at every step that it was utterly different from what he had imagined. At every step he experienced what a man would experience who, after admiring the smooth, happy course of a little boat on a lake, should get himself into that little boat. He saw that it was not all sitting still, floating smoothly, that one had to think too, not for an instant to forget where one was floating, and that there was water under one, and that one must row, and that his unaccustomed hands would be sore, and that it was only to look at it that was easy, but that doing it, though very delightful, was very difficult. And that's the reality. Close relationships, the single best predictor of our happiness. But we don't get those relationships without being willing to invest time and energy and effort and conflict and compromise. And my final picture for you today is of my lovely dog. And I end with this picture to illustrate a really important point. Pets bring us what kind of love? Unconditional. Unconditional. You don't actually have to do the time and energy and effort and conflict and compromise. So my husband and I have been married for 24 years. We have the 3 kids. You saw that picture before. We have this lovely dog. And we have the following deal. If one of us leaves the other, the one who leaves takes the 3 kids. And the other one gets this lovely dog. And that has kept our relationship very committed because no one can leave. I gave this talk in Dallas a couple of years ago, and a man came up afterwards. This is my final story. And he said, I have the perfect illustration. Imagine you come home from work one day, and you put your wife and your dog in the trunk of a car, and you drive around for an hour. At the end of the hour, when you open up the trunk, who is still happy to see you? And then that man told me he was divorced, and I'm like, really? I can't imagine. Anyway, you all have been a wonderful audience. I hope this was a good final session. If you have questions that you'd like to ask, or if you'd like a copy for free of this entire presentation, you can shoot me an email and I will send it right out. You can also watch a version of this talk on my website, sandersonspeaking.com, for free. And I have a new book coming out that talks about the link between happiness and health and longevity. If you shoot me an email, I'll also be glad to put you on a list for as soon as that appears. Thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you all for coming to Congress this year. And I now say that this session of Congress is closed. See you in Atlanta.
It might seem